Welcome to the Natural Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Backus, and today, again, I have Emily Trinkus, and we are doing our Cosmic Wisdom Talk. Hey, Emily.
Hi, Christine. So happy to be talking with you again.
I'm really excited about, well, I probably say that every time. I'm always excited about our conversations because I get so many insights and we always have fun. Let's just we've kind of started this trend of doing a little grounding meditation to get going. So let's do that. And again, I say this every time for people listening. If you're listening and you're driving, then please don't shut your eyes. But otherwise, if you've got the space and time to do it, let's all just kind of drop into ourselves for a moment, which is we're going to be doing a lot of this, I think, as we get into all this Aries energy coming into ourselves. So if you can close your eyes, or just take your gaze down and then bring your attention into your physical lived experience right now. If you're sitting, notice the contact between the seat bones and the chair or whatever you're sitting on. If your feet are on the earth, notice the contact between the feet and the earth. Both of these contacts are how we stay in communication with our planet. And allow yourself to feel held. Maybe even feel that gentle hug of gravity. It's a very Saturnian thing, right? Gravity, what's holding us down. And then allow yourself to just notice your breath. At least if you're like me, you don't always notice that you're breathing. And of course, sometimes we just don't breathe, especially online. So notice that you are breathing without having to change it. And see if you can just allow yourself to rise and fall with that rhythm of the breath for a couple of moments. Noticing the inhalation and the exhalation. It's kind of a universal pattern of movement, right? In and out, expansion and contraction. And just a couple more breaths like that, where you're just tuning into your physical experience, even if you've got earbuds in or you're sitting in front of a computer or you have your phone handy, there's still this physical aspect to our experience. And this is where the embodiment happens. This is where the stress goes away. It's just staying in our experience. A couple more breaths like that. And then just take your time and come back to our little shared space, whether you're here live or by recording. And yay, I feel better.
Me too. Thank you.
So, Emily, we didn't really talk about how to like dive in, but I wanted to say a couple things about just where we are in time, and then I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about Neptune and Aries and maybe whatever else is on your mind, because you just taught a whole class about that, which, by the way, for people listening, is still available on your website, or you can sign up for Emily's Substack and become a member, and then you get all of this cool stuff
That's
and
right.
monthly new moon and full moon recordings. There's your
Thank you.
commercial plug.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You can sign up for my Substack, but it's a little more random what you get. So today is Friday, May 2nd, and we just had a Taurus new moon recently, very recently, last weekend. And I just wanted to point out that we're in Beltane season, which is that fertile time of year. And technically, it doesn't happen, I think, until Monday. I think it's Monday, May 5th, and the technical time of Beltane is when the sun reaches the halfway point of Taurus. And I think we all in the Southern Hemisphere, you might feel it differently, although you're coming out of the hot season. We're coming out of the cold season in the northern hemisphere, and it's this time where everything's starting to bloom. So everything feels quite lush, and at least here in Montana, things feel like they're really starting to open up. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is background for today, and I'm sure you'll have some things to mention too. And but is that the moon is still out of bounds, and we're in what's called a period of lunar standstill or lunastice, which happens every 18 years, where the moon is in its maximum periods of being out of bounds. So if you're feeling extra emotional or sensitive, it happens a couple of times a month, and we're in one of those periods. It's just ending right now. It just I notice it just feels everything feels like more and more intense, and I just tend to be a little more dramatic, I think, too.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, more intense, more emotional. And it's interesting timing with this season of fertility and growth, and also being in a time, this is the first time this year that we've had real momentum. This lunar cycle that started on Sunday with the Taurus new moon, this is the first lunar cycle of the year that we've had with all three inner planets moving forward, and actually every planet moving forward until Sunday when Pluto goes retrograde. But we have all of the inner planets, the personal planets, moving forward. So 2025 is really just getting going in terms of momentum. And then maybe, yeah, I'm intrigued by how that lunar energy interacts with that, yeah, with that momentum. I don't know, any thoughts about that?
I think it's my sense of it is that it's like it's periodic intensity, which we have with the moon anyway, but it's more pronounced because of the extremes that the moon is going to in the out of bounds. And it doesn't, I've noticed that everything feels very periodic for me right now. Like it really, I can feel the waxing and waning of the craziness. And I'll put if I get a moment, I'll put a link in the chat too. But there's a woman in the UK who's written some really cool articles, as has Daniel Jamario of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School, about this lunastice and lunar standstill. And I don't know, they probably unpack it a little bit more in terms of the effects, but the moon it governs how we feel, right? And for those of us with Cancer rising, it sort of governs everything. So again, it's just like you're not crazy if things are feeling a little bit more like up and down and up and down.
And also thinking about the moon as connected with our daily rhythms. And
Yes.
so that up and down and maybe all over the placeness and things feeling very intense and extreme, and then not so much, and then again, yeah.
Yeah, and you think about it, like I really have noticed it a couple of times. Now we're getting to the point where the sun is or the moon is a lot higher in the sky than usual at these out of bounds periods. And during the winter, it's much lower in the sky during the out of bounds periods. And it's like, you kind of get used to thinking you know where the moon's going to be when you look out the window, and all of a sudden the moon is in some weird place that doesn't make any sense. That's and it I think it's I mean, if you thought about it, like if it was the sun and the sun was in a weird spot, you'd really freak out. But even the moon, even if you're not that tuned in, you just kind of all of a sudden notice, wait a minute, what's going on? And the moon, I find
Right.
unpredictable anyway.
Yeah, that seems disorienting.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe adds to some of the disorientation of what's going on now too, with these big planetary shifts, like Neptune moving into Aries. Like when a slow moving planet changes signs, there's an adjustment period because it's a new frequency. It's something we haven't experienced before in our lives. So yeah, we need to, yeah, it can feel weird and disorienting, and I don't know what to do with this. I don't know what this is.
I love that word. That's a great word, the disorienting, because that explains so much of what's been going on in this time, I think, is that there's and it's funny when you were saying that the year is really just getting going. I can only imagine that everybody else is going to hear that a little bit like I do, that wait, what? There's already been so much radical change and radical disorientation and upheaval, and we're just getting started with that. But I think, that's obviously true. And maybe talk a little bit more about that from what you're seeing, because we talked about it last time, all the movement from Pisces to Aries, but now it's really starting. And so maybe you have some more things to say about that.
Yeah, well, the Pisces to Aries is really starting or started with Neptune moving into Aries on March 30th. And then later this month, we've got Saturn moving into Aries on May 24th. So those big shifts. And what I mean by just getting started or really ramping up or momentum really building is that actually today we're coming out of the Mars retrograde shadow. Mars just got to 6 degrees Leo, where it turned retrograde on December 6th. So we've been in such a period of reorientation, rethinking, a lot about the past, redoing. And it's not that a lot hasn't happened this year. A lot has happened this year, but I think on a personal level, it's been a lot about the inner shifts. And
Mm.
then what we're coming into, what has already started, but what's building is what are those inner shifts going to look like in our outer lives? And
Mm.
that's where things are just really starting to happen. And I think about you in terms of the moving to a new state and this whole new life coming in, which is very very much this shift into Aries. And I think about myself, and I've had a lot of reorienting around my work life and teaching, and feel like I'm in an in between. I'm not sure what the new is going to look like. Some new things are starting, but so and that's all based on what's been happening internally for the past 6 months or so.
Yeah, the word that comes to me, and I'm sure we've mentioned this before too, is the emergence.
Yeah.
And I think about, that dark sort of, I think of Pisces as kind of dark and hidden, right? And the gestation of the seed. And then of course that's what Aries is, from a tropical point of view, is the seedling finally poking up and emerging out of the
Yeah.
soil.
Yeah. So a lot of the Pisces backstage, behind the scenes, in the unconscious, in our emotional lives, and also the Pisces endings. I know we talked about that in January when we talked about the astrology of 2025, but this this is full on, and even and it is weird because we do have now Neptune in Aries. Saturn is still in Pisces until May 24th and then goes back again into Pisces. But I think as Saturn is coming to the end of Pisces, that's where those completions and endings and surrender and letting go gets more extreme. And at the same time, we're feeling into the new, but there's still, we're not standing in the new yet. And again, that's coming later this month, but then Saturn goes back into Pisces, Neptune goes back into Pisces later this year. So there's more of that dissolving and mystery. And I think that's part of what's challenging too, is that there's so much that's still mysterious and in the shadows. More clarity has come and more clarity is coming, but
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's kind of I mean, just the trajectory of the year is we're just now starting to get a taste of all this new stuff. As you say, Neptune into Aries, then Saturn moves into Aries, and then we don't even, and then Jupiter moves into Cancer beginning of June, and then Uranus moves into Gemini in July. So like this next quarter, right? This next 3 months is more of this new and new and now for something completely different, to quote Monty Python. You know,
right. Right. And this is really like between now and September, October, this is go time. This is like what's been calling you, where you've been ready to take a risk, try something new, go out on a limb, go for it. This is the time. And this lunar cycle in particular is so powerful. I mean, that was a super new moon.
Right.
I think the closest super new moon of the year, the Taurus new moon on Sunday, and Taurus has a lot of traction, right? Taurus as fixed Earth. It's like, what do you want to build? Things can really stick in this lunar cycle, and we have the momentum of everybody moving forward until Sunday. But even Pluto retrograde, I don't see that as, getting in the way of our momentum and plans.
Yeah, that I think that's going to be more collective mood, don't you?
Well, personal mood as well, but yeah, collective happenings could be,
Yeah.
stuff around technology and the grid and that kind of thing. In our personal lives, there's certainly a lot coming up emotionally as we approach the station, as we approach Pluto changing directions on Sunday.
Yeah,
And we're just coming out of that Mars Pluto.
I was just going to say we're just coming out of that Mars Pluto opposition, the third one, and I don't know if other people felt it, but when I'm particularly sensitive to it because of where it is, maybe, and because I'm so tuned in, but it just felt like so much tension and so much aggression, and that, well, and what I've seen out there as well is that projecting onto others, right? Projecting dark and evil and bad and power and all that onto others. And I wonder if the Pluto, I mean, I think that's what Pluto gives us an opportunity to see is where we're giving our power away by being afraid of something or directing our anger to something or being in resistance instead of creativity, that sort of thing. And I wonder if the Pluto retrograde might sort of allow us to revisit some of that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe so. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, and Pluto retrograde certainly brings up, I mean, for some people, it's going to be more personal than for others, but certainly bringing up what needs to transform. What am I ready to shift? And I think in Aquarius, it is a lot about our concepts and mindset and how are we perceiving the world and ourselves and our humanity and who do we want to be moving forward. But I will say with the Mars Pluto opposition, I definitely felt the frustration, anger, crankiness of that. And one evening, even though I had various other things that I maybe needed to do, I was like, I need to make art, Mars and Leo, right? I need to move this energy and just sit down and make some art because I hadn't in a while. And that helped.
Yeah, that's a great advice. I think you've given that advice for Pluto in general too, because it's such a creative, Pluto is all about that raw creative force, and Mars is about the creative force too, but they're different levels. So that's
Yeah.
great advice.
Yeah, and as I've talked about before, that Mars and Leo opposite Pluto and Aquarius, really finding our personal creative power in relation to the collective WTFness of this time, where yeah, we're in a crazy world and it's very unpredictable. Aquarian energy is super unpredictable and nonlinear and chaotic. And how do we create in the face of that? And that opposition is a kind of standoff or face off. And I think this has been part of the theme of Mars retrograde starting out in Leo. How do I find my personal creative power? And I know for myself, making art is a practice of making my life, or creating art is a practice ground for creative power in my real life.
Yeah, because and do you still do mostly collages when you do? Yeah.
Mostly collage, and I also busted out the paints, which I hadn't
Oh, wow.
done for a little while, and just like let it be messy, let it be Plutonian.
Yeah, because I know that your collages, which again, if you're signed up for Emily's Substack, you get all those. They're always so illustrative of like what's going on, and so it does kind of capture the mood of the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So um I think we can't escape today without talking about Neptune. And I think we should talk about Neptune and Venus because at the moment that we're meeting, they are together in the sky at what is it, 20? No, they're at what, 1 degree?
One
Degree.
Aries. Yeah. Yeah. So today, this is pretty epic because this is Venus's very first meetup with Neptune and Aries. So this has never happened in our lives. And as we did have Mercury conjunct Neptune, was that last week? A couple weeks ago? We had
I
the
think
moon. No, I don't remember. And I can't, anyway, I won't bother
I want to say
looking.
it was like, yeah, it was last week because I remember feeling it.
And last Friday was the first time, and I deliberately taught my Neptune and Aries class last Friday because that was the moon in Aries
Oh,
conjunct Neptune for the first time. So the idea is we have this collective planet, this slow moving transpersonal planet, Neptune, having moved into Aries for the first time in our lives, hasn't been there since 1875, I think is when it left. And as the personal planets, as the closer planets connect with Neptune, that's when we can really feel into it more personally. And so we're in the getting to know you, Neptune and Aries. What are y'all about? So Mercury is the mind perceiving it and making that mental connection. What's going on here? And I need to learn about this. I'm so curious. And the moon just feeling. And part of Venus is bringing into our bodies, Venus, the feminine immanence. And, so I think it's maybe appropriate that as we were talking about before we started the recording, both of us having a kind of duh moment of, I don't really know anything. Do I actually have anything to say? And then how that is a maybe accurate reflection of the field right now, because this early Aries energy, Aries being the first sign of the zodiac, Neptune being at the very beginning of Aries, Venus meeting up with Neptune there. The beginning of Aries is the clean slate and this field of potential where everything is new. And if we think about Aries as the pioneer, right, heading into unknown territory, or the Fool card, stepping off the cliff into the unknown, into the mystery. That's all of us right now. And on the one hand, that's very exciting because what's been more murky and, like you said, that sort of darkness or like underwater, the parts of us that have been more mysterious and underwater, and I have no idea what the hell's going on. And that's a different kind of not knowing than the not knowing of it's all brand new and there's so much possibility. And I think part of this is feeling our own power. I wanted to share a quote. This is something I shared in my Neptune and Aries class. And, I like to look up famous people who were born with, in this case, Neptune and Aries, and, embodiments, humans who embodied that energy in a really exciting and inspiring way. So Swami Vivekananda, born with Neptune and Aries, he said, everyone goes with the flow, Pisces, but the one who goes against the flow becomes someone remarkable in life. So I love that as a kind of bye-bye Neptune and Pisces, bye-bye Saturn and Pisces, where with that strong Pisces energy that, especially the last couple of years, I mean, Neptune was in Pisces since 2011, but then once Saturn also went into Pisces in 2023, super full on Pisces, which is about surrender and going with the flow, and not my will but thine, and letting go and letting God goddess. Okay, that's not where we're at now. And we're still a little bit there because Saturn's still there, but especially by or after May 24th, when Saturn's also in Aries, this is maybe going against the flow, or I create my own flow.
Yeah.
I create my world. Yeah, my will, not
Yeah.
thine.
I think that definitely feels like a big outcome of this transition from Pisces to Aries is that we have to come back to me and what am I going to create? And that's why, I think I get the resistance to what's going on in some cases. I totally get it, but I think that's like a waste of creative energy very often. And I think that's part of what we're seeing is the need for us to create the world that we want and the opportunity.
Well, and that's what's so important to recognize is the opportunity. Exactly, that there is this clean slate energy. And thinking about the Saturn Neptune conjunction, I like to bring up the fact that the last time that happened was 1989, and that was the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of communism, in the Eastern Bloc and all of that. And remembering that, and I shared this in my Neptune class as well, but I moved to Czechoslovakia when it was still Czechoslovakia in the spring of 1991, just after the Velvet Revolution, which was in the fall of 1989. And so there was a peaceful revolution, the end of communism in Czechoslovakia, among other places in Eastern Europe. And people there said, we never thought it would end.
Yeah.
We just thought this would be the rest of our lives. And then it was over. Bam. And
Yeah.
so thinking about Saturn as reality structures, Neptune's the great dissolver. Neptune can dissolve reality structures, but also Neptune, the planet of consciousness. And the collective consciousness determines the reality structures. And so what seems so permanent and Saturnian, like a freaking wall, like the freaking Berlin Wall, it's it's not that can dissolve with a shift in consciousness. And I think this is so important to remember when it's like, look at this and look at that, and it's all a mess, and it's going to be that way. There's nothing I could do, and it's just going to be that way. Like, no,
And
no.
that, if I remember right, that was Capricorn, right? Wasn't that
That was Capricorn.
yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely governments and government structures and
Right,
yeah.
right. So if we think about this as this big, I want to think about that Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries as this massive shift in consciousness in the individual,
Yeah.
where we dissolve the old limitations, Saturn fears, Saturn, our old reality structures, who we thought we had to be or how we thought our life had to be, and through a shift in consciousness create something radically different. Of course there is a shadow here, right? Because I think Neptune, our God concept, Neptune the divine, Aries the self. So seeing ourselves as gods, goddesses, right? Our power to create the world. And of course, there could be a big shadow there with getting, I'm God. It's like if I'm God and you're not, that's where we get into trouble. But
Right.
if I'm God and I know you're also God, and my cat is God and my mom is God and we're all God, then we're good, right? But really, this is like massive change on a personal, individual level, and not underestimating what that can create in terms of the world reality structures.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think about I really got kind of hooked into this story that the human design people are telling about this period. And I'm probably gonna not I'm gonna paraphrase based on my understanding, obviously, but for so long we've been kind of tuned in, like if you think about service, right? Pisces, so that's a very Pisces Virgo word. If you think about service, we've had this idea that being in service means to be thinking about like how I'm in service to others and like letting that outside in dictate what my decision is about how to be of service. if that makes sense. And the switch is that it comes more from inside, from this individual consciousness, right? I think about it as living from the inside out. So rather, when I think about being in service, my service is to follow my soul's truth, or whatever you want to say. Um, but it's not necessarily, it's like I'm not trying to fit myself into the structures I see out there. I'm not trying to fit myself into what other people determine is service. It's more about um, what what's coming from within. And that, I think that's a lot of this Pisces to Aries shift, and all the other shifts too, right? I mean, the other outer planet shifts. It's very, I know that it can be distorted and misunderstood when I say it's more about like, what do I want, and how do I be me? And of course, in some realms, we've been taught that that means being selfish and not caring what happens out there, not caring how I impact the world. But that's not what I'm talking about. Because it, and I'll say one more thing about it. You know, my teachings about Saturn, I love to point out that Saturn was the ruler of the Golden Age. And in the Golden Age, there were no laws the way this is constructed, right? There were no laws, there were no rules, because people lived from the soul. They lived, the rules were on the inside in a, and I don't mean like there were rules, but the rules and the way people lived was more soulful, more in, just in harmony by definition. And that's my ideal for what we're coming into. And particularly with the Saturn Neptune, is this idea that somebody else has to tell me what's moral. Somebody else has to tell me what's true. Somebody else has to tell me um, what is service. That needs to go away, and it's time for me to trust, right? Trust myself and my own being, and that by being in alignment with myself, and that's where I'm contributing. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot in there. I think this piece around service is really important because that's Neptune as well, spiritual service. And so if we can, so in Aries, we serve by following our authenticity, or by expressing our authenticity, and also our vitality. And
Yeah.
if we think about kind of what's wrong with the world, is that we have, you know, zombie nation. We have a lot of people checked out, depressed. Depression, not sadness, it's lack of vitality, lack of fire, lack of excitement about life, lack of, I want to get out of bed this morning because I'm so excited about life and so inspired. And that's Aries.
Yeah.
Aries is the spark that gets the whole zodiac going. So if we are on fire, if we're doing what really inspires us, what really lights us up, what really energizes us, imagine how great our service is to the collective, because then we can be a spark that catalyzes other people to light up. And not, I guess the part of the shadow of that Aries energy too could be the boss. You know, I'm all fired up about me and doing my thing, so I'm going to tell you what to do. But the higher Aries leadership energy is inspiration, is, oh wow, that's possible. You, someone can do that, someone can live their life that way and be that fired up and inspired and creative and powerful. I want what she's having. And so that's, you know, really, again, coming back to self-trust and acting on where our fire is taking us. And I also think it's interesting what you're saying about Saturn, because this is a rebirth of Saturn. When a planet enters Aries, it's a rebirth. And I just want to bring in, so people have a reference point, the last time Saturn was in Aries, since many of us were on the planet for Saturn being in Aries before, unlike Neptune, except for the vampires, or the enlightened beings who stay in the body forever. So the last time that Saturn was in Aries was April 1996 to June 98, and then again from October 98 to February 99. So that's a great reference point if you want to see like what's this Saturn and Aries all about. And of course, it's different this time because coming together with Neptune and Aries, the last time that Saturn and Neptune formed a conjunction in Aries was 1703. So we were not around for that. So there is something different with this Saturn and Aries, but you know, yeah, good to look back what
Yeah.
was going on. And then, 29 years before that, when I was born with Saturn in Aries, for those who have been on the planet longer and can look back to the previous period, that would have
Yeah, I have
been.
a couple of them too. So I remember what was going on in the 90s, but I'd have to go look up the others. And there's a couple of great and just I know there's one raised hand. Just put your comments or questions in the chat and we'll try to get to that. And then afterwards after we turn off the recording, we can have a conversation. But Catherine talks about being born with Neptune and Saturn conjunct in Libra, and come to think of it as being bringing dreams into reality, right? Neptune, dreams, and Saturn, reality. And that even in the example of the Berlin Wall, if people are dreaming of freedom, right? And then that creates that reality at that Saturn Neptune conjunction.
And let's just talk about that. And I know there's other great comments in there too, but just thinking about dreams into reality with Saturn, Neptune in Aries, a new dream of the self. I mean, because I think part of what Neptune in Aries is about is dissolving our old identities, our old self concepts, who I thought I was, who I thought I was supposed to be, who my parents wanted me to be, who society told me I should be, et cetera, et cetera. And dissolving that so we can manifest a new dream of who we are. And I think this can be, again, coming back to disorientation or destabilization, it can feel, I know this feels really strong for me, like in this state of like, wait, who am I? And
Yep.
who am I not anymore? And who do I want to be moving forward? And it can feel very one foot in each world at this time and still mysterious what the new self looks like, but a good time to be dreaming into what might be possible for me and what I didn't think was possible before, the old Saturnian limit or conditioned self.
Right. And, just for those of you that are astro geeks, I mean, where it's showing up in your chart, wherever you have Aries in your chart, can't talk, is this incredible new beginning where you can almost, like, I'd say you can recreate yourself based on, who you really, who you feel you are from the inside.
Yeah, this is an amazing time for reinvention,
Yeah.
reinventing ourselves. Yeah.
The other thing, there's a couple of, so Catherine also says, possibility being the true measure of beauty. I love that. That's lovely. Yeah. And that
Well
is,
said, Saturn, Neptune, Libra.
yeah. And there's so much about, I think that a lot of what we're seeing in this next few months is, and maybe have been seeing, is this we have to let go of, dissolve the old structure of what we think is possible, because it's our imagination that becomes very limited, right? And if you can't imagine it, it's very hard to create it. And of course, whether you think it's intentional or not, there's all sorts of programming, whether it's through the media or entertainment or whatever, that sort of shows you, oh, here's what's possible. It's like we're being herded and contained, and our schools do that too, right? This is how the world works. This is how math works. This is how English works. This is how whatever works. And right now, we don't know how things work because it's always been way more vast and mysterious than we've given it credit for in the last couple hundred years. But B, I think what is possible, not only how are we seeing more of it, but it's changing in itself. And I think that's a lot of what these planetary shifts are showing us. I mean, there's fascinating writing and work being done out there about the Earth's consciousness itself starting to shift, and
Mm.
the consciousness of the world shifting. If those of you that listen to Pam Gregory, so I hardly ever go watch videos or listen to podcasts, even though I have obviously we have this podcast. But she just had somebody on who was talking about big shifts like space weather, big, cosmic shifts that you can see in various ways. And I mean, there's just lots of great work being done about what's really possible. And even that is probably limited to some degree by what we can understand.
Right. Right.
And
Okay. I was looking at Kate's comment about 96, 98 period being when she was in the Peace Corps in Nepal and big change chapter. And so I just did a quick astro spy on Kate and was reminded that Kate has Aries rising. So anybody who has Aries as their rising sign, like even more epic, because this means Saturn and Neptune coming into the first house, which is a massive rebirth. And the first house is the house of the self. So big reinvention, big rebirth. Yeah, Kate, it's going to be epic. Epic times coming.
yeah, you get to be a completely new person. Yeah, and Catherine, you said Pam Gregory's interview with Veda Austin, and the guy that I'm thinking about, his name is Stefan or Stefan, and it must have been recent, but maybe now I'll have to go listen to more.
I definitely want to listen. The Veda Austin one has been on my radar, but I haven't listened yet. So thank you for that reminder, Catherine.
Yeah, yeah, I think the other thing I wanted to mention about this, and this also kind of goes into when Uranus moves into Gemini, um, is that, and again, there's been lots of great writing. That's the problem with being on Substack, is there's so many good writers and so many interesting perspectives, and it's way better than Facebook for scrolling, in my opinion. But I don't mean to give a commercial break for Substack, but that's my experience. But what I wanted to say is that, we have this, even our way of knowing and gathering information and understanding things has to change, because Jupiter in Gemini, where it's been for the last year, has given us this like down, like super, like drinking from a fire hose of information and perspectives. And as I said before we started, I think it's also given us like an overload of opinions. Everybody has opinions about everything because we're now all armchair experts because we have the internet, right? We can research anything we want. But there's this, I think we need to play with, and this goes back to Venus and Pisces and Venus and Neptune being together today, and what you were saying about a more embodied way of being. We can't just know with our brains. We cannot just know with our definition, our Western definition of mind, right? Eastern definition of mind includes mind and heart and gut. It's not that, it's not separating the head from the body. And I think as we understand what it means to be embodied beings, and as we practice more and more in terms of being embodied, then we also are learning and need to learn a completely different way of knowing. And I'm just going to give one quick example that's based on this whole huge, crazy life transition that I'm in right now. Is that it was like kind of a switch went off in my head right after my birthday. Might have had something to do with actually being sick for the first time in a few years, and just not being able to do anything but sit there and think. But I have this knowing of what I need to do and where I need to go and the path I need to follow. And I'm getting lots of validation from external circumstances, sort of kind of falling into place very easily and quickly and flowing. But my mind, my brain, my thinking process is still like, what the F is going on? This is not supposed to be the way things are. I should never have thought about doing this. It doesn't make any sense. It does from one perspective and it doesn't from another. And even my emotional makeup there's a lot of grief about the decisions I'm making and the moving on that I'm doing. But there's this deeper sense of truth that is, I mean, I could resist it, right? I could say, oh no, I'm too scared, I'm not going to do this, but that would not go well. And I've had too much practice sort of tuning into what do I know at that deeper level. And that's a small example, and it's very personal about a decision I'm making in my life. But I think even as we're trying to digest, another Virgo Pisces word, all the stuff coming at us right now, all the change, all the information, all the new ways of thinking about things, all the opinions from, everybody and their dog. I think there's still, even there, like a way to become more tuned in to the body and more tuned into that deeper place that has the ability to understand what might be incomprehensible from just the thinking point of view. And I think it's particularly relevant with the explosion of AI, because AI, they call it intelligence, but it's really not intelligence if you think about intelligence as being embodied, right? AI can't have wisdom, in other words. It could take other people's wisdom and sort of distill it down and make something up, but that's still not an embodied wisdom. So I think it's just all new from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think what you're speaking to, it makes me think about how Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini, it
Yeah.
being opposite its home sign of Sagittarius, and Jupiter also in detriment in Virgo. And those are the two Mercury ruled signs where it's about the data and the information and trying to figure it out at that mental level. But we really need to balance that with, as you're saying, with the body's knowing, because with Jupiter and Gemini is like this abundance, or like I said, fire hose of data and information and opinions and ideas, but where's the deeper meaning and
Right.
understanding and knowing, the intuitive knowing, and the truth? What's the deeper truth? And just the thinking about Uranus moving into Gemini, it's like what you're speaking to is like, it makes me think, oh, ain't seen nothing yet, like, oh God, because Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. It's a mental planet in a very mental sign. And again, this is one that I think probably most people listening haven't seen before, since Uranus's cycle is 84 years. Maybe some of the elders tuning in were born with Uranus in early Gemini. But I think what you're saying about different ways of knowing, Uranus, revolution, liberation, was Uranus in Gemini the when the printing press was developed, or am I
Uh,
thinking about something else? I think it's
I
Uranus.
wrote that down somewhere. Actually, I think what I want to say about that is that was when the Saturn Jupiter conjunctions were in the air, and I don't
Okay,
remember where Uranus
okay.
was.
Okay. But I feel like this could be, and probably a both and, with the AI info overload, data coming at us from all directions. I mean, I get irritated when I'm standing in line at the bank and there's a screen with advertisements, or I'm putting gas in my car and there's a screen with more, like, really? We need more of that? Anyway, so this proliferation going even more gangbusters than Jupiter and Gemini, with Uranus and Gemini, and that'll be 8 years, not 1 year. But also at the same time, Uranus is the planet of rebellion and revolution. So I think there's also going to be a rebellion against that digital everything and information overload, and accessing, like you're saying, accessing knowing in unexpected ways that could be really exciting. And we could, of course, working with this, we can make it really exciting for ourselves rather than just getting uh, hit by the fire hose. And I mean, in a sense, it's like there can be such an overload that everything is meaning, but nothing has meaning. It's all meaningless.
Well, and I also get this, I wrote this a couple years ago about overwhelm. When we get overwhelmed, it's because we're trying to hold on to control. And we're really seeing that, I think, right now in social media and media in general. I mean, there's so many more sources of information, and the old legacy media has broken down, not entirely, but to a great degree. And there's a lot of new ways of getting information. And there's, there's even been an explosion of social, maybe not an explosion yet, of social media realms, and that may even get crazier with Uranus. And as long as we're trying to know, oh, well, what's really true is, this news outlet says this is happening, and that news outlet says that is happening. So I have to figure out what's true. Well, that's a form of control that is just going to be blown. The life is going to blow past that if it hasn't already. So trying to know, like, well, who's right, who's wrong, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, that's just going to get us in more and more trouble. And, what are the options, right? Totally check out, which is, that's the Neptunian escape route. But the other way is to like stop trying to have an opinion, stop trying to figure out who's right, stop trying to find certainty, and and again, this goes back to like going within, like what is mine to do here? What do I need to respond to this? And if it's just in the news media and it's not in your life, then that would be a question to ask about 5 times before you do anything or get upset or allow yourself to get really emotional. Yeah, I mean, there's a comment in the chat. Musk is Mr. AI trying to replace our entire executive branch with AI. Well, yeah, that's one viewpoint. And maybe it's right. I don't know. And I don't think we will know. And there's some truth to it, obviously, right? There's definitely some factual evidence to back up all of these viewpoints. But
And not only the executive branch, but I would say like and not only Musk, right? Like there's a bigger technocracy
right.
coming online with, and that's very Pluto and Aquarius, and I think very Uranus and Gemini. But education being taken over by AI. We don't need teachers anymore. We can just have kids taught by
Counseling,
AI.
astrology,
Medicine,
the Leo King just sent out an email yesterday or today about his new and I can't, he calls it hyper something.
Hypergate AI. Yeah,
Hypergate. Yeah,
yeah.
astrology AI. And there's going to be more and more of that. And I don't think it's going away, right? And this is what I mean by deciding what's bad and what's good. And obviously we all get to discern. But there's like a bigger picture, and we need, I think it's not going to be a simple matter of, oh, I'm going to figure out what's right, what's wrong, who's right, who's wrong. I think there's got to be a deeper knowing, and the response needs to come from a more grounded, embodied, divine, like the divine within place too. But I mean, obviously I've got opinions about all this too. So
Whether you're right or wrong, who knows? But yeah, it can be maybe with Uranus and Gemini even easier to get caught up in the this or that
yes.
duality or polarization versus the dropping into my knowing, and then thinking about coming back to the Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries. Like at the end of the day, does it really matter what everyone else's opinion is or what they're saying about this or saying about that versus what am I creating in
Yeah.
my world? And one of the cool things I'm thinking about with Uranus and Gemini is our local environment. So this could also be exciting with, well, I'm just unplugging from, watching the world show on my screen and instead getting more involved in what's actually happening in my neighborhood and in my town or city. And a lot of, yes, stimulating excitement and exciting connections happening there. So it's like, yeah, we could go in the direction of our minds being completely hijacked by the info overload and polarization of opinions and all that nonsense, and or we could get really active in our local worlds.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it has so much to do with trusting your experience, not your thinking, but your actual experience of what's happening. Because, that's the thing. I mean, I love it. I mean, I'm somewhat addicted to all the stuff going on out there because some days it depresses me, and some days I just I think it's fascinating. And if we can see it as theater, it makes it a little bit easier. But my experience, my day-to-day experience of life is what I think you're talking about. And that's why I say coming back to being grounded and embodied is is it's going to be what gets us through when everything is just moving so fast, and especially everything on a screen, right? And the one other thing I want to say about this, I'm pointing at my computer, right? And this, the phone, any electronic device, is that it's not pure, right? This isn't a pure transmission. This isn't, because it's going through a computer that has its own energetic signature, and it's going through, the wires or the non-wires that have, it all affects the message. And then everybody has an agenda. So every piece of news or every opinion, we all have agendas. And, I think the best we can do as individuals is recognize our agendas and try not to impose them on others. But when you're like the media source that you choose to get your information from, it has an agenda. Right? And those of us, I mean, I'm old enough that I grew up with the Walter Cronkites and the uh, Huntley Brinkley show. I mean, that's a long time ago. And we trusted those people to be telling us the truth about the things that mattered. And that's gone, right? That's gone now. That those trusted news sources simply don't exist. Not because they're not, some people are trying, but we live in a world where there's so much agenda. And I think, again, maybe this is partly the Jupiter and Gemini, but it's been going on for longer than that. And I think Pluto is in Aquarius is actually exposing some of those shadowy, um, like the shadowy agendas that you may or may not know were there, and some of the tentacles that are reaching out between places. And I think it's, again, it comes back to trusting yourself, and what we've said before with the Virgo Pisces eclipse axis right now is really honing our powers of discernment through being embodied. And as you point out, being in your local experience. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think what's going on with the media could get really interesting with Uranus and Gemini, because then it's like, I mean, and already this is happening by that sense of everybody's a reporter. Everyone can be a reporter. Everyone's carrying around a video camera
yep,
and can get on the internet and post whatever, right? This kind of democratization of media, Uranus and Gemini, but also, like I said, a rebellion. This could be a real rebellion against the media, or yeah, who knows what, because it's all going to show up in very unexpected, weird, out of the box kinds of ways. But we can play with predictions, but Uranus defies our predictions because it's something we can't even think of at this point. But I think it'll get interesting. And I think, yeah, really being embedded in our, like if we think of Gemini as the reporter or the investigator or journalist archetype, like getting really curious and interested in what is actually, like you're saying, the experiential knowing, like what is actually happening in my environment, what's real, as a way of discerning what's real. Because, and as we know, AI can give us any
yep,
made up image on the screen that looks really real. And again, I think this comes back to the embodied discernment, but also to get really involved, get off the screen. I think, yeah, maybe that's part of Uranus and Gemini is a rebellion against technology. I think people are very hungry for getting together in real life.
yeah,
And like, and that could be part of Pluto and Aquarius too. Like on the one hand, yeah, AI taking over everything, the technocracy. On the other hand, the grid goes down and that doesn't exist anymore. That's gone. No
right.
power, no technocracy. So then what are we left with? Our local environment and the people in our neighborhood. And right.
And we had a real life story about that in was it Spain or Italy? I can't
Yeah, Spain.
Spain last
Yeah.
week, and I mean, I didn't haven't read that much, but you get a couple of stories about people like, oh yeah, we're just going to go hang out at the coffee shop and people making music and we're kind of returning to just hanging out with each other, which is what we all love to do really anyway. And
Right.
I was going to say that made me think about when I did my Saturn in Pisces class a couple years ago when Saturn went into Pisces, one of the things that struck me was yeah, we'd had Neptune there for a while, but with Saturn, the reality planet coming in, it really felt like this deep fake, right? Being able to really fake what's real, that like this really blurring between what's real and what's fake. And of course, we all know, as you just said, that you don't even know if videos that you're watching are real, right?
Yeah,
I suppose AI could probably even create a conversation like this. I don't know.
absolutely. There could be a fake Emily and Christine talking about Lord knows what, and you would think it was totally real,
Right. And I'm
even if we're
curious,
saying crazy shit. Who knows?
which we do anyway, but yeah, but we really mean it. And then I'm thinking about with Saturn moving from Pisces into Aries, just kind of like with Neptune moving into Aries, I think there's a little bit more clearness. And when Saturn moves into Aries, I wonder how much more clarity we'll have.
I think a lot more clarity. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think, and I think again with Saturn at the end of Pisces, there can be like the extreme lack of clarity at the same time as we're dreaming into the new with Neptune and Aries and navigating that weirdness.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago, so I read something by somebody saying that maturity, a sign of maturity is being able to hold two conflicting ideas or ideals at the same time. And I think that's where definitely like we're there on steroids right now.
Right, right. Well said.
Yeah. Well, what else? I feel like we're kind of coming to a good wrap up point. So is there anything else on your mind, Emily? I mean, there's so much we could talk about still, obviously.
Well, yeah, that feels like a good wrap up point. And yeah, maybe we can meet again as Uranus goes into Gemini and do more exploration around that.
Yeah, that's in July. I was thinking, yeah, I would love to do that because I just think that's going to be fascinating. And it's there, Uranus is in Gemini through November 6th, July 7th through November 6th. So yeah, that last period of the year when everything starts to go back again into the old signs is going to be, I don't know, I'm not really looking forward to that. We might need the respite, but I'm
Right.
really looking forward to all the Pisces energy again.
I know. It's been a lot. It's been delusious,
Yeah.
delusious, but it's our home stretch. Yeah,
Yes, definitely. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been fun. We did find plenty to talk about, it seems
of
like.
course.
Yeah.
Of
And
course. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, and just a reminder if you missed it at the beginning that I will put links in the show notes, but Emily did just do a class on Neptune and Aries. And I know you'll probably do a class on Saturn and Aries. I've been doing lots of stuff on Saturn, so I'll probably do something about that. Will you do a class on Saturn and Neptune conjunction?
Probably because I only touched on that in my Neptune class and might say more about that when I do the Saturn class, whenever that might be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
maybe early next year doing a Saturn Neptune exploration.
So if you want to keep following all of this fun stuff, make sure that you're subscribed to both of our Substacks and we're both pretty accessible. At least I'm pretty sure you're pretty accessible through messages and emails too. So
Of course. Yeah.
just say hi. And thank you all for listening. Thank you for those of you that showed up live and thanks for the great comments. It's been terrific. And I guess that's it. We'll see you next time for the Natural Wisdom Podcast. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.